let's talk about DC Comics' most controversial characters. These are characters that have sparked outrage with the fans at various points through their publication, received condemnations from the creators themselves, or got DC into a lot of trouble. Which for a company as big as DC Comics that has been publishing as long as they have, is quite a few. Now, this list is going to be a little bit subjective. I have narrowed it to the top 5 by looking at various forums and posts and rankings and all that sort of thing, and just my own knowledge of being in the comic world this long. So without further delay, here are the top 5 most controversial characters in all of DC Comics. Starting with number 5, we're going to have a bit of an easy one here, and we're going to talk about Wonder Woman. Now, Wonder Woman is one of the most popular characters in all of DC Comics. She has been for a very long time. She's the first female superhero. She's one of the DC Trinity, the big three, alongside Batman and Superman. So she is without a doubt very popular, but she still does have many flaws and has garnered quite a bit of criticism over the years, and quite a bit of defenders as well. And overall, the biggest issue with Wonder Woman is that she is a formless character. She's had so many changes over the years. Her origin, her costume, her powers, her gear, everything is like constantly changed because she doesn't really seem to have a good sticking point as a character, and so they've changed her character many times over the years, which makes her very inconsistent as a character. Particularly, we see certain things like in the New 52 and going forward, her character really changed from being a super heroine to being like this warrior type character, where she's not like a costume wearing superhero anymore. She's more wearing like her Greek battle gear, so she's more akin to Thor now than say like Captain Marvel, which I think makes her definitely less heroic. I think it makes her less of what she was intended to be, more detached from her roots as a character, and less of the icon that she once was. She's also had some bad comics over the years, like Amazon Attack and stuff like that, where her character is not well represented. She actually doesn't even have a consistent comic book run all the time because she is not super popular, and these are some reasons why. She's totally all over the place. Because of this, she is a rightly criticized character, but some people love her, some people hate her. Such is the life. Moving on to number 4, this is a more recent character and a more controversial character. This is going to be John Kent, aka Superman. So if you've been following the John Kent stuff over the years, this is Superman's biological son, and he was originally like a super boy. He and Damian Wayne had a comic together, the Super Sons, right? And John was poised to eventually become Superman, right? But then some time stuff happens. He's aged up, and Superman is essentially out of the picture. In the comics, they have an explanation for this. In real life, it's because the Superman trademark is under litigation yet again with the families of the creator, and so they remove Superman from the spotlight. And this time, though, they are replacing him with John Kent, with the intention, I think, of saying, hey, if this works out, let's just make John Kent the real Superman, so we don't have to worry about these lawsuits anymore. The problem with that is, John Kent is not a very good character. First of all, it's hard for anybody to fill the shoes of Clark Kent Superman. Superman is the superhero. He is the superhero, right? He's the one that many others, if not all others, are based on to a degree. And John is just not as good of a character. He does not represent the Superman brand very well. He is not that heroic. He doesn't have that same sort of warm feeling that Superman gives off, right? Of just being that good person, being a good hero, and everything that goes along with that. He's never had good character development. He seems a little bit rushed to the position that he is in now. He's definitely not a character that's ready for the mainstream. He needs like another decade in the oven, maybe. And you have sort of the joys of modern mainstream comic writing, where he is a very politically charged character now. John Kent is quote-unquote bisexual, which just means that he's gay. But before they decided that he was gay, he may have dated a woman or something. But from here on out, he's almost certainly only going to date guys. He pushes a lot of left-leaning political issues like climate change and stuff like that, which is really a very clear contrast from Superman, who was truth, justice, and the American way. He represented America as a whole, versus John Kent seems to just represent a very specific left-leaning ideology. Backlash against the character has been pretty extreme. but he does have many defenders as well. And love him or hate him, it doesn't seem like he's going to be going anywhere anytime soon. But real quick, I do want to mention that I am crowdfunding my third graphic novel, Cardinal Starstruck, on Indiegogo. It's got great story, great art, it's action-packed. Please do follow the link in the description to check out the Indiegogo page. Look through all the information about the campaign and the book itself, and if it interests you, please do consider backing. I put a lot into this book, I think it's really great, and I think that you will really enjoy it as well. So again, please follow that link, and I appreciate any support. Thank you. Moving on to number 3, we have Starfire. Now, Starfire is a very popular character. Not as much nowadays, but she certainly is very popular, mainly because of the Teen Titans TV show from, 2003, made her pretty much a household name, along with the rest of the Teen Titans. That show characterized her very well. She was funny, quirky, she was a pretty rounded character, a lot of personality, and so many fans were disappointed when you look at her comic book counterpart, and she is very, very different. Starfire in the comics, first of all, doesn't really have any meaningful storylines. She doesn't really have a ton of development as a character. She's a pretty bland character, very shallow, and the big thing about her is that she's an extremely sexualized character. She kind of always has been, but especially in the New 52 with her redesign, she's an extremely sexualized character. Most of her stories, if she even has a storyline, revolve around her relationships and sort of being sexually promiscuous, to where now that's pretty much her entire character. So she is very much a far cry from that Teen Titans character from the TV show that people actually liked. Now she is just this. Pretty much a massive fumble for this character. Now, some people do like Starfire. The New 52 Red Hood and the Outlaws series was popular, as was the Rebirth version. She has fans and everything like that, but there was a very clear and vocal backlash against her character, specifically in the New 52, but even going forward from that, because of how she's depicted, how she's drawn, and how she really is so much worse of a character than the cartoon counterpart. Moving on to number 2, we have Rick Grayson. That is right, Rick Grayson, not Dick Grayson. Now, they are the same character. Really, you could say that this is more of a controversial storyline than particular character, but at this point, I think they are treated kind of independently. So I will talk about this character, the worst version of Dick Grayson, aka Nightwing. So if you don't know what this is, a few years back, there was an absolutely terrible storyline where Nightwing, Dick Grayson, is shot in the head by KG Beast. And first of all, cringe that the scar on his head looks like the Nightwing symbol. Cringe. But even more cringe was the aftermath of that, where Dick Grayson has lost his memories and is now this completely new, different, reinvented character called Rick Grayson. Very original naming. And instead of being Nightwing, he's like a cab driver, vigilante. He's kind of like a Moon Knight ripoff, kind of. And he's like this rough and tough, shaved head, whatever. Absolutely terrible character. Like, it's a very stupid redesign, very stupid name, and just overall like a stupid plot. Like, the actual story itself wasn't even good or interesting. This was absolutely like the most hated era of Nightwing probably ever. It's something that nobody asked for, and when they even did it, it wasn't even done well. It wasn't even creative or well written or anything like that. Really, it seems like they just had an idea for a character, but instead of creating a new character, which would have taken some time, they'd have to actually wait for the character to organically become popular, they just decided to take an already popular character and transform him into this other character they wanted to make. They wanted this sort of Moon Knight ripoff character, but instead of actually making one, they shoot Dick Grayson in the head, change his name to Rick Grayson, and throw him in a taxi cab. Eventually, obviously, this does get reverted. He gets his memories back. He becomes Nightwing again. All that stuff. It turns out that was like a big plot by the Court of Owls, which is okay, I guess. But it really was a terrible comic and terrible decision for the character. And it did piss a lot of people off. The backlash for this was pretty extreme, which is why they tried to turn it around pretty quickly, and they've since tried to sort of retcon what that was and why that happened and everything. And it's like, you can't fix it. You already did it. So just move forward and we'll all just forget about it as a community and act like it never happened. But seriously, it was a pretty terrible decision and terrible story. Now, some people I've seen will say like, hey, it actually wasn't that bad. In a vacuum, if you just read the stories, they weren't that terrible. They could have been better, but they weren't that bad. But I think it's just the fact that you took such a popular character. He's one of the best-selling comic characters of all time. And you gave him this terrible treatment of completely removing his look and his personality and everything about him that people liked, and turning him into this character with such a stupid name really rubbed people the wrong way. Now, before I get to number 1, let's go through a few honorable mentions here, and all my honorable mentions are actually Bat family members. The first, I want to talk about Harley Quinn. Now, I did my most hated DC Comics characters, and Harley Quinn was on that list, so I don't want to repeat her on this list. Harley Quinn sucks. A lot of people like her, though. She has a ton of fans. There's a reason that she is everywhere, but she has a ton of haters, of which I am one, so I had to mention her. Barbara Gordon also is kind of a controversial character. Now, more so because it seems like they, for a while at least, didn't really know where to go with her character. She was popular enough as Batgirl, and then of course the Joker shoots her in the spine, she becomes Oracle. And I think a lot of people actually preferred her as Oracle and wanted like, hey, you know, Batman Robin can do the dynamic duo, Oracle's the tech person helping them out on the side. And so whenever they reverted her back from Oracle to Batgirl, a lot of people had a problem with that. And I don't exactly blame them. It's not as much a point of discussion today, but for a while there was a pretty big discussion around that and around Barbara Gordon as a character. Lastly, Batman himself has to be one of the most controversial characters in all of comics right now, just because he is everywhere. Kind of like Harley Quinn. Batman is everywhere. He is DC's #1 hero by a mile, and he's been that way for a long time. He's everywhere. There are so many Batman books. It's overwhelming. And at this point, a lot of people are burnt out on that and are tired of Batman. Okay, moving on to number 1 now. The most controversial character that DC has ever put out has to be the character Rorschach. Rorschach from the Watchmen comic by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. One of the most popular, famous comics of all time, with Rorschach being the most talked about and controversial character from that book, without a doubt. The conversation about Rorschach has been going on for decades at this point, and essentially comes down to whether or not you should see Rorschach as an admirable character. Now, if you go with the actual writer's interpretation, you go with what Alan Moore has to say about it, he never intended for Rorschach to be sympathetic or admirable or anything like that. Rorschach was a caricature of his despised political ideology. To him, Rorschach is like the worst person that he could think of. It's the complete opposite of his own personal political ideals. And yet, so many people attached to Rorschach and loved the character and related to the character. And this is because Rorschach is a black and white character. He sees things very black and white, very simply, good and evil. You have to do the right thing and never compromise on your beliefs. He's also very brutal, murdering, torturing people. He lived a life of extreme suffering. He's a bit deranged. He's not exactly a role model, but people do like him because he does exactly what he believes in and he does not compromise on that. So even though he's supposed to be a critique of like vigilantism and that sort of mentality, a more right-wing mentality, people often look at him as being one of the only characters from Watchmen who was right? Because even in the end, after everything had already transpired, Rorschach wanted to tell people the truth about what had happened. Even though that would undo the massive sacrifice that had just been made, essentially it was like a, do the ends justify the means, or do you always tell the truth no matter what, even if it might hurt somebody else type of thing, but at a much grander global scale. And Rorschach said you must always tell the truth, and it cost him his life. Critics of Rorschach will say that if you like the character, you missed the point. You misunderstand him. You don't get it. Your media literacy is too low. But honestly, especially in today's age, a lot of people are seeking a rigid morality, an actual solid foundational belief system on which they can position themselves. And that is what a character like Rorschach represented, right? So it is more than just, you know, is vigilantism good or bad? It is even more than just left versus right ideology. It does speak to a much bigger concept of morality and a belief system as a whole, which makes him one of the greatest comic book characters of all time, but also one of the most controversial. But let me know what you think. Is Rorschach the most controversial character of all time from DC Comics? Or is it somebody else that I forgot on this list? Let me know in the comment section down below, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.